The jungle writhed beneath the weight of morning mist, thick and clinging, curling around ancient trunks like watchful spirits. Towering trees loomed over the underbrush, their canopies tangled in a lattice of green that choked the sky. Somewhere, a howler monkey shrieked, its cry echoing through the dense foliage before being swallowed whole. To the native life, this place was home. To the newcomers, it was an inconvenient terrain that stank of rot and humidity. Commander Talek of the Vathari Legion stood at the edge of the alien wilderness, his skin a pale metallic sheen under the light of Earth's sun, his gaze dismissive. He turned to his adjutant, flicking a clawed finger toward the forest wall. "This is the habitat your survey data classified as hostile." "Yes, Commander," the adjutant replied with crisp deference. "High biodiversity, aggressive fauna, difficult navigation. The locals call it the Green Hell." Talek scoffed. "Hell is a word for primitives. This is a garden. Untamed, yes, but hardly threatening." He stepped forward, one heavy boot sinking slightly into the moist soil. Behind him, a column of armored troops stood waiting, their exosuits humming softly in the quiet. The Vathari were not new to planetary campaigns. They had crushed resistance on 7 colonized worlds in the past cycle alone. Earth was to be the 8th, a feral, underdeveloped marble rich in organic matter and strategic positioning. The wildlife here, although dense, lacked coordination. The dominant species, Homo sapiens, possessed rudimentary spaceflight and crude projectile weapons. No planetary defense grid, no orbital fleet, just grit, arrogance, and bones. The Vathari did not come to negotiate. They came to pacify. The first landing zones were cleared with orbital plasma strikes. Fires raged across hillsides. Cities were quarantined, infrastructure dissected. Human military outposts, caught off guard and outgunned, crumbled within hours. Those who resisted were neutralized. Those who fled were tagged and observed. It was all very efficient. Talek reviewed the initial reports with growing disdain. They were animal hides in some regions. Their weapons jam in humidity. Their command networks are obsolete. Why did the council hesitate? The adjutant hesitated. There was a cultural clause. Concerns about disproportionate response. Disproportionate? Talek sneered. "We are evolution's scalpel. We cut away the rot. Earth will be no different." He dismissed the adjutant and strode into the forest with his elite squad trailing silently. Overhead, a drone buzzed, infrared sensors scanning for anomalies. All they saw were snakes coiled beneath ferns, birds flitting from branches, and the occasional primate watching from the shadows. Then came the lion, or rather, the lioness. She darted from the undergrowth with feline precision, fangs bared, and claws extended in a blur of motion. One Vathari was dragged down before the others reacted. Plasma bolts hissed and split her open mid-leap. Her body crumpled, steaming, beside her kill. Talek inspected the remains. Primitive, instinct-driven, strong, but undisciplined. Earth's apex predator, you say? Among mammals, yes, the adjutant replied, though humans dominate them all. Talek looked toward the deeper jungle. Not for long. Over the next week, multiple campaigns were initiated. The Vathari fanned out across continents, establishing control grids and harvesting local resources. Satellite uplinks were established. Climate control began in test regions. The resistance, if one could even call it that, was disjointed, isolated cells of human fighters using terrain for cover, striking and retreating. Their tactics were ancient, their tools outdated. It was a matter of time before the last human strongholds fell. But then, things began to change. It started with silence. A patrol in the Amazon failed to report back. Not unusual, given the terrain. Then another patrol disappeared near the Congo Basin. And another, this time in Borneo. No distress calls, no transmissions, just flat lines on the life monitors. Drones sent to recover bodies found nothing, only trampled foliage and blood. The forest swallowed the rest. Talek grew irritated. Malfunctioning trackers. Perhaps predators dragged the corpses. But the drone footage said otherwise. In one clip, seconds before static interference overwhelmed the signal, a shape moved. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a VA theory. It was something else. Tall, camouflaged in an unnatural way, nearly invisible save for the shimmer of movement. It held something long and black, some kind of weapon, and vanished as fast as it appeared. Talek froze the footage and zoomed in. Enhance. Stabilize. The technician tried, but the image only fractured further. Unknown heat signature. No identification match. He tapped his claws on the console. Not animals. Not civilians. Soldiers. Human soldiers, the adjutant asked, disbelieving. Possibly, but not the ones we've seen before. Soon, the jungle became a ghost town. VA theory squads were dispatched in full armor, accompanied by combat drones and sensor packs. They went in confident and came out, if they came out all in pieces. One survivor stumbled into camp 2 days after vanishing, drenched in blood that wasn't his own. He dropped to his knees, muttering in a trembling dialect. They don't speak. They don't move. They wait. He died before medical units could stabilize him. An autopsy revealed microfractures in his joints, as if he'd been dragged through hell. Talek issued a new directive. These aren't random attacks. This is a coordinated response. A unit. Possibly multiple units. He began to study Earth more seriously. Human military history was brutal and extensive. Wars of attrition, guerrilla tactics, urban insurgencies. One archived entry spoke of snipers, lone killers who could eliminate targets from distances far beyond detection, often dressed in leaf-covered suits called ghillie suits. The image made Talek pause. He compared it to the shimmer on the drone footage. A pattern emerged. Not random. Not magic. Strategy. These weren't animals. They were predators. Talek convened his war council in the heart of the rainforest, setting up a temporary command post cloaked in electromagnetic shielding. He authorized deeper scans, more aggressive sweeps, even localized firebombing of suspected ambush sites. But nothing changed. The more they pressed, the less they saw, and the jungle only grew darker. They're not hiding, Talek murmured one night, reviewing the new casualties. They're hunting. No one laughed. Even the adjutant, ever formal, spoke with unease. Commander, this campaign, it does not follow protocol. We cannot see the enemy. We cannot predict them. Talek looked into the trees where mist clung to branches like breath. We made a mistake, he said finally. We assumed they were like the others. But humans, they are not apex because of teeth or muscle. They are apex because they adapt, and they kill in silence. Outside, beyond the perimeter, something rustled in the leaves. A camera feed cut to black. Talek didn't flinch. We proceed, but no more arrogance. We face ghosts, and ghosts deserve respect. The jungle listened, ancient and quiet, and deep within it, eyes watched, unblinking, patient. The jungle breathed around them, slow, hot, and alive. Sergeant Elias Rains lay still beneath a carpet of ferns and damp earth, his rifle cradled against his shoulder, the barrel wrapped in camouflage tape that mimicked the streaks of lichen on nearby bark. Sweat beaded under his eyes and slid silently down his cheek, pooling at the edge of his collar. He did not wipe it away. Movement cost lives out here. Through his scope, he watched the VA-30 patrol snake through the clearing below. 12 in total. Standard formation, too rigid for this environment. Their armor gleamed faintly despite the adaptive coating, and their step rhythm never changed. They were creatures of doctrine. Predictable. Mechanical. Elias exhaled slowly, aligning the crosshairs on the lead soldier's throat joint, one of the only weaknesses in the alien's armor configuration. He counted 3 heartbeats, then a fourth. A soft PHFFD escaped the suppressor. The VA-30 dropped like a marionette with its strings cut. No sound, no warning. The others tensed. One shouted in their harsh, clipped tongue. Confusion blossomed as they spun, weapons raised, but saw no enemy. From a second position 50 meters west, another shot rang out, just as silent, just as deadly. A second alien collapsed, flailing for a breath it would never take. Panic set in. The squad scattered, abandoning formation. Some dove for cover. Others fired blindly into the foliage. Mistake. Elias shifted position in slow, deliberate motions, using the natural lay of the land. His ghillie suit blended seamlessly into the jungle floor, making him part of it. He spotted a third Vituri retreating toward the tree line, armor glinting in a sliver of sunlight. Another breath, another squeeze. 3 down. The rest never made it back to report. By the time Elias rose from his nest and signaled the all clear, the jungle was quiet again, unnaturally so. He moved like smoke, silent, invisible, gathering spent casings, erasing footprints, even repositioning broken branches to their original angles. It was ritual now. No evidence. No trails. No comfort for the enemy. His earpiece clicked. Bravo 3 to Falcon. Clean sweep. Elias tapped the mic twice. Affirmative. Pull back. Dust off at Delta Rock. We've got another drop pod, landing north of the basin. They're not getting any smarter. He allowed himself a small smirk. Good. Let him keep learning the hard way. Elias moved, his silhouette vanishing into the layers of green as easily as it had emerged. The hunt was never over. Not until the last one bled. Miles away, at a fortified Vituri outpost, Commander Talek stood before a trio of hollow armor sets. Each suit was slashed open at critical points, the inside scorched with high-velocity impacts. The soldiers inside had been retrieved in pieces. None had managed to activate their distress beacons. One had a clean hole through the optic visor. Another had 3 punctures through the chest plate, grouped tightly, professionally. Talek's jaw clenched. These were my elites, he muttered, more to himself than to the technicians cataloging the remains. They died like prey. Post-mortem suggests supersonic projectile trauma. The chief, analyst noted. Kinetic weapons. Old designs. Old doesn't mean obsolete, Talek said, turning away. These humans don't fight for territory. They fight for the kill. He activated a holomap of the jungle sector. Dozens of red blips marked missing patrols. An uncomfortable number. Intelligence teams had begun calling it the vanishing zone. No movement detected. His adjutant reported, voice tight. We've scanned for electromagnetic signals, heat signatures, motion trails. Nothing. They move between scans. They time it, Talek said. That's the discipline we missed. They're not tribal savages. They're ghosts. Snipers. Operatives. The word tasted bitter. The VA-30 prided themselves on clarity of war. Lines, ranks, declarations. But this was mud and shadows and whispered death. Talek tapped a command into the console. We escalate. Deploy Spectra drones, seismic sensors, and double the night sentries. They think we fear the dark. We'll show them otherwise. But the jungle didn't care for alien resolve. It cared for blood. That night, a sentry line at Outpost Kara went silent within minutes. No alarms, no flares, just a slow bleed of static from their comms. When recon arrived at dawn, they found nothing. No bodies, no weapons, just helmets, 12 of them, arranged in a neat circle. Inside the center, a message carved into the bark of a great tree. You are not alone in the dark. Talek stared at the feed, his fists clenched behind his back. How far do these humans go? The adjutant hesitated. These are not regular troops, Commander. We believe they're part of a specialized unit, long-range reconnaissance, possibly multinational. They appear to coordinate across vast distances without detectable signals. Primitive tech. Shortwave, maybe. He shook his head. Or they've adapted something we haven't cracked yet. What do we do? Talek turned, slowly. We become predators. The next sweep was larger. 3 squads, 24 very supported by drones, thermals, and motion detectors. They moved in staggered intervals, cross-communicating, overlapping fields of vision. The jungle was a cage. No one could move without being seen. But no one was seen. Hours passed. The canopy darkened. Night fell like a slow poison. Crickets screamed, then went silent. Fog rolled in low, curling around armor plates, and muffling even the low hum of drones. Then came the first kill. One drone feed blinked out, followed by its handler's scream. The squad spun, lights flaring, but the shadows betrayed nothing. Then another soldier fell, gurgling, dragged backward into the mist. They fired at everything, trees, shadows, their own feet. The jungle lit up in a storm of plasma and noise. Branches shattered, leaves caught fire, and yet, nothing fought back. When the panic subsided, 5 were gone. The squad leader called for extraction, voice cracking. We're compromised. Enemy unknown. They're in the trees. But the signal jammed. All that reached command was static and breathing. Elias watched from the canopy, his body strung between branches like a panther. His team was already pulling back. The VA theory would retreat soon, leave their dead behind. Again, below him, a wounded alien crawled through vines, one leg trailing uselessly. Elias dropped silently, landing in a crouch just meters away. The creature turned, eyes wide with an emotion it had not known before deployment. Fear. Elias didn't raise his rifle. He didn't need to. They sent you to take a planet, he said, knowing the translator embedded in the alien's armor would catch it. But you never asked what it cost to own one. He vanished before the V3 could reply. Back at their jungle command center, Talek received the casualty report without comment. His eyes stared out across the tree line, unblinking. The jungle no longer felt like a conquest. It felt like a mouth. A waiting thing, too quiet, too old. He turned to the adjutant. They think this is their land. Their war. They're wrong. Talek shook his head once. No, they're right. He looked back into the trees, the mist curling like breath across their trunks. And we walked straight into their hunting ground. Sergeant Elias Rains stood before a wall of worn maps and blood-marked terrain models, a flickering lantern casting wavering shadows across his face. The room, buried beneath layers of jungle and camouflage tarpaulins, was humid and silent save for the soft shuffle of boots and whispered status updates passed between scouts. Each report told the same story. The VA theory were losing control. He ran a finger down a red line. Operation Pine Needle, their latest infiltration, then tapped twice on a cluster of skull icons drawn near the base of Ravager Hill. They're concentrating forces here. That's not retreat. It's a trap. Staff Sergeant Miko Tanaka leaned in, brow furrowed, sweat glistening across her brow. They're baiting us. They think we'll take the bait. Elias looked at her. We will. Tanaka blinked. You want to walk into a trap? I want to spring it. Outside, the night echoed with the low drone of alien engines and the metallic screech of scouting mechs. Over the past week, the VA theory had shifted tactics. No longer were they sweeping in tidy columns. They brought walkers now, sensor drones, flame cyclers, technology made for open war, not invisible enemies. But the jungle refused to open. Elias knew the fear was spreading in their ranks. He'd seen it in the erratic movements, the longer patrol intervals, the way their field officers now paused before entering dense brush. They no longer marched. They crept. The VA theory command structure, once cold and pristine, was unraveling under pressure it wasn't built to handle. But he also knew this war wasn't over. Desperation made monsters. 3 hours later, Elias and his team were belly-crawling through thorns and slick mud toward the outer perimeter of Ravager Hill. Tanaka flanked him on the left. Two others, Callan and Navarro, shadowed on the right, every inch of their movement buried under layers of moss, leaf, and silence. The VA theory had set up motion-sensitive tripwires around the hill's approach, covered by turrets mounted with pulse lasers that could cut a man in half. But the lines were strung for bipedal movement, chest-high or ankle-low, designed for standard soldiers, not those who moved like the forest itself. Elias ducked under the final wire, rolled into a hollow beneath an overgrown tree root, and watched. The enemy base was less a fortress than a desperation bunker. Lights flared every few seconds as soldiers shouted orders, dragged crates, adjusted weapon placements. Mech stalked the perimeter in twitchy arcs, each with scanners swiveling in every direction. There were too many to engage directly, but they weren't here for a firefight. Tanaka slithered beside him, voice no louder than breath. Back doors guarded, but their power grids exposed, there, near that rock outcrop. Looks like they didn't finish burying the cables. Elias nodded once. We cut their eyes. Then we take their teeth. He slid backward, vanishing beneath ferns, rejoining the rest of the team. Each was a shadow sculpted for silence, shaped by years of training in wars the rest of the world tried to forget. The jungle was a crucible, and they had become something sharper than soldiers, something older, deeper. By the time the charge was planted, the patrols had cycled once. The timing was precise. Elias signaled. A soft click. The lights died. Panic bloomed. Inside the hill's perimeter, V-30 troops scrambled, voices raised, Mech shuddering to a halt mid-step. They fumbled with torches, goggles, fallback generators. In that moment, when their tech betrayed them, the jungle answered. Silenced rifles cracked once, then twice. Then a flurry of death came like wind through leaves. Elias moved with precision, his team striking from shadows and fading before return fire could anchor. Tanaka lobbed a flash charge through the generator tent, blinding the reinforcements gathering there. Navarro gutted a comms, officer mid-signal. Callan used thermite to slag the walker's knee joint, sending it collapsing into a mess of metal and sparks. But it wasn't just them anymore. Across the outer jungle, independent hunter squads began moving. Not military, locals. Rangers, survivalists, ex-special forces who had refused a draft but took up arms anyway. The Apex program had spread beyond sanction boundaries. It had become a wildfire. One by one, the enemy's strongpoints faltered. Machine sentries fired at nothing, spent, overheating. Drones dropped without signals. The command outpost's roof went up in flame as a makeshift Molotov spiraled through the ventilation unit. The VA theory had numbers, tech, doctrine, but their discipline was cracking. Commander Talek stood amidst the carnage, rifle raised, voice thunderous as he tried to rally his troops. Hold the line. Stabilize. They're not gods, they're flesh. You kill them. But his words hit air. His officers were dead or dying. His targeting system flashed error every time he aimed. The jungle screamed, but it was not the humans doing the screaming. Then Elias emerged from the mist, alone, not charging, not shouting, just walking. His face was streaked with camouflage, eyes gleaming like cold steel, rifle pointed low. He said nothing. Talek hesitated. That pause was his end. Tanaka dropped from the tree behind him and drove a blade through the command node at the back of his armor. Talek gasped, fell, and stared up at the sky as darkness folded over his vision. For the first time in his long military career, he understood the horror of fighting something you couldn't see. Elias stood over him. You should have learned from Earth's wildlife. Talek rasped, barely able to speak. "We thought you were animals." Elias looked to the canopy, where dozens more humans now crouched or perched, watching in silence. "No," he said, turning away. "We're the apex." By morning, the hill was abandoned. The surviving Vitheri had scattered into the forest, hunted like prey. Their signals were weak, confused, fractured. No reinforcements had come. Satellites failed to pinpoint their distress calls. The planet itself seemed to have turned against them. At the temporary extraction point on the cliffside ridge, Elias knelt to refill his canteen from a spring. The cool water clouded slightly with ash from the nearby fires. Behind him, Tanaka watched the sun rise over a horizon streaked with smoke. "You think it's over?" she asked. "No," he capped the canteen. "It never is. But we broke their lines. We show them the first lesson." Tanaka raised an eyebrow. "And what's the next?" Elias stood, looking toward the jungle they just bled in. "You don't invade Earth without bleeding for every inch. And you sure as hell don't underestimate what comes for you in the dark." The wind shifted. From the trees came no sound of wildlife, no bird song, only the subtle echo of movement. A whisper of branches, too rhythmic to be natural. More were coming. Tanaka watched his face. "They're sending reinforcements." "Good." Elias checked his rifle, tightened the sling. "Let them come." Then he turned back to the trail, vanishing into the green, and the jungle closed behind him. The air was heavier now. It clung to skin like a second layer, thick with the scent of scorched metal and fertile decay. Far above, the Vieteri carrier ships hung motionless in the atmosphere, a trio of bruises against the amber sky. Their gleaming hulls no longer symbolized power, but hesitation. Fear had crept upward through the ranks and taken root even among those who had never stepped foot on Earth's surface. From orbit, their scans showed dense vegetation and scattered bodies, but no clear enemy, just swaths of death woven into the jungle's design. Elias Rain stood at the edge of a ravine, staring across a valley that once hosted a thriving alien forward base. Nothing remained but warped metal and scorched ground, where vines were already curling back to reclaim the soil. Behind him, the apex units moved like ghosts, blending into the terrain so effectively that even Elias occasionally lost track of them. Human ingenuity had become something far more primal, precision honed by necessity, evolved through desperation. Miko Tanaka crouched beside him, inspecting a piece of broken Vitheri tech. "It's a command relay," she muttered, "meant to coordinate ground signals with the fleet. We fried it before they could adapt." Elias nodded but said nothing. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. He had begun to recognize the pattern and how the VA theory moved. Their logic, once methodical and overwhelming, had fractured. What began as invasion had shifted into reaction, then survival. And yet, they kept coming. From the tree-line emerged Private Kale, soaked in mud, his ghillie suit nearly indistinguishable from the roots he'd crawled through. "Contact confirmed. New pod drops along the western ridge. 10 kilometers from here, 2 clicks north of Ridgeback Stream. Heavily armored." Tanaka exhaled slowly. "They're not just retreating, they're digging in." "They think they still have a chance," Elias said, voice flat. "They don't know they're already dead," Kale added. The sun began to descend, casting long shadows through the broken canopy. The apex units mobilized quietly. Fire teams split into cells, each moving like extensions of the terrain. Orders were given with hand signals and glances. They didn't need radios. The jungle had taught them to communicate in ways the VA theory couldn't decode. As night fell, so too did the temperature. The chirp of insects masked movement, and mist rolled low across the forest floor like breath from some slumbering titan. Elias led his squad through narrow animal trails and riverbeds, always beneath the sight line of the ships above. The aliens had grown cautious, abandoning high-altitude bombardments in favor of containment and attrition. They believed, in the arrogance of their empire, that time would weaken Earth's defenders. But time was what humans had learned to weaponize. By midnight, they reached the ridge. Below, the alien encampment buzzed with activity. Large exo-tanks, shaped like predatory beetles, circled defensively. Ground troops, bulkier than before, wore adaptive armor that shimmered faintly under infrared. Towering sentries hummed on pivoting axes, scanning the undergrowth with a rhythm that betrayed mechanical predictability. Elias observed in silence. "They've upgraded," Tanaka whispered. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "We're not fighting their machines. We're fighting the minds operating them." Operation Ash Veil began 30 minutes later. From the treetops, Apex snipers released clouds of engineered chaff, blinding sensors, and warping heat signatures. Claymore traps planted days before burst in synchronized arcs, carving gory silhouettes into the compound's outer ranks. Just as the aliens recalibrated, thermite charges erupted at key junctions. Ammunition stockpiles, oxygen processors, coolant nodes. The camp was not just attacked. It was unraveled, cell by cell. But the true strike came when the perimeter faltered. Not through the gates, not from the trees, but from below. Elias and his team emerged from tunnels carved into the soil by weeks of silent digging, surfacing like revenants beneath the central command hub. He could smell the sterility of the alien air filters, hear the panicked static of broken comms. The enemy commander, a lank, six-limbed strategist named Ilktar, stood frozen at his console. Elias raised his rifle. Ilktar lifted his hands, claws trembling. "We misunderstood your species. We believed you disordered. Primitive." "You're not wrong," Elias said. "We just learned to make chaos a weapon." Ilktar glanced at the monitors. Every screen showed footage of his camp in ruin. Viatheri screaming, stumbling, consumed by jungle fire and unseen blades. "You cannot sustain this. Your planet will run dry. Then we'll move to yours." Elias fired. The next 48 hours cemented the campaign's climax. The orbital fleet, left blind and voiceless, made the fatal decision to deploy full planetary assault units. Massive dropships filled with elite shock troopers. It was a last, convulsive gamble. But by then, the Apex units had already laid their trap. LZ Delta was a crater before the first landing gear hit soil. Entire ravines had been mined with buried explosives. Aerial descent paths were funneled through fog-thick kill zones where even the birds didn't fly. The shock troopers landed in killing fields and never even saw the shooters. When they fled back toward their pods, the jungle swallowed them whole. What VA-30 survivors remained scattered into isolated pockets. Some tried to hide, others attempted surrender. But there was no safe zone, no green zone. Not anymore. The forest had become sentient through its inhabitants. Every tree concealed a hunter. Every silence promised death. 3 days after the final push, a transmission crackled across all known frequencies. The voice of the VA-30 Supreme Commander, Vurexen, echoed into Earth's orbit. "To the defenders of Earth, we accept defeat. Withdrawal is immediate. Your kind was underestimated. This error will not be repeated." Elias heard the message from a hilltop outpost as he cleaned his rifle. Tanaka sat nearby, peeling rations open with calloused fingers. "Guess we won," she muttered. Elias grunted. "No, we endured. That's what winning is now. Always was." They sat in silence for a moment, listening as the hum of enemy ships lifted into the upper sky. No fireworks marked the end. No victory banners. Just the wind threading through blackened leaves, and the quiet sobs of soldiers realizing the storm had passed. A week later, Elias walked the remains of the battlefield alone. He saw new growth already breaking through the ash. Wildflowers poked up near scorched supply crates. Birds sang again, but the jungle remembered. He stopped at a tree marked with a small strip of cloth, Kale's marker. The young private had gone missing during the final assault, and they never found his body. Elias tied a second strip beside the first. Then he stood still, letting the wind touch his face. They had defended their world, not with fleets, nor with superior technology, but with the terrifying brilliance of adaptation, with the ghosts of wars long past whispering in their ears. Humanity's apex wasn't in its strength. It was in its refusal to die. As he turned to leave, a low sound stirred in the distance. Not alien, not mechanical, just the rustle of leaves and the warning cry of a hawk overhead. Still, Elias paused, because he knew the galaxy wouldn't forget what happened here, and he was already preparing for the day it came knocking again.